All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on today's webinar, Tackling Your 2022 Hiring Goals with AI and Automation. A quick intro on myself. My name is Wendy Liu. I run product marketing at Sense, and joining me today is Jeff Pelliccio, the founder of Allied Insights. And I pride myself on saying your name right.
I appreciate it.
For those who don't know, just a quick background on Sense. Our mission is really to partner with forward-thinking staffing companies to transform the talent experience while helping you also lower your costs, protect your revenue, and grow your business. We have over 600 customers that we serve across the nation. And we really pride ourselves on thinking about these three core pillars about being, one, able to help you grow your business, whether that's attracting more candidates or helping you win more business deals. Two, helping you keep that retention, so helping you keep happier talent longer. And then three, leveraging automation to really help your processes increase in terms of recruiter efficiency and process efficiencies throughout your business. And I'm going to introduce Jeff over here and talk a little bit about Allied Insights. Oh, there we go.
Oh. How you doing, everybody? I'm Jeff Pelliccio. As Wendy said, I'm the founder for Allied Insight. We're a growth marketing and fractional CMO marketing agency built directly for staffing. So we have a lot of staffing experience. We align with the corporate initiatives of every given staffing firm, making sure that you have that support from both a marketing but also sales alignment perspective. We also make sure that things are scalable so that way you can continue to grow your staffing agency as you see fit, and making sure that you have a trusted partner as you continue to evolve, whether that be from a tech stack perspective or process perspective or even just growth. So that's Allied Insight. Awesome. The recap, right? I feel like we were just here. So from the initial webinar that we had done, actually, I guess it's in October, we were talking about like great experiences aren't accidental. And so for that, it kind of got broken into like three specific areas. But with regards to like preparing for success, we spoke to those three people that were joining the webinar that hadn't mapped out their candidate journeys yet. So I think one might be on here. So we should say again, like map out your candidate journeys to make sure that you understand like how this whole thing rolls out. Doing that obviously helps you identify the gaps that you have in where it is that your touch points are and how candidates and clients are interacting with you. Testing and training is critically important. In fact, I would say training is just as important as testing. And then obviously, get that feedback, learn and adjust. Next stage was that, delivering of that white glove experience. We spoke about how, being in a candidate-centric market as we are today, how it's really important to prioritize the candidate experience. And so therefore, making sure that you have automated your status updates in order to make those interactions timely. Aligning with the client onboarding. So making sure that like your onboarding process internally at your staffing agency actually aligns with the onboarding process of your clients in order to make that transition nice and smooth. And then also you want to be able to have internal pipeline visibility so that way from the front to the back of the office, everybody is aware of like what's happening and when it's occurring, and making sure that there's no sort of, again, gaps or drop off after someone accepts an offer, which would just be horrible, right? You've already done all the work. It'd be worse to stumble at that finish line. Last, we talked about fostering advocacy. So a lot of times staffing firms will basically stop once the transaction is closed and an offer has been accepted. And so, from fostering of advocacy, you want to make sure that obviously like maybe something like a first day introductions, I know pre-COVID we were walking in, but first day introductions would be nice to do. As well as like check-ins in order to see like, how was your first day? How was your first week, month, et cetera. Alumni programs are a great way to re-engage with individuals who have already worked with your brand in order to get them to participate once again, provide referrals and things of that nature. And last, even looking at things like ambassador opportunities where you might be able to like really build out an army of advocates that can really drive your brand forward and help you establish a better baseline against your competition in the marketplace.
Awesome. All right, going into our next slide. So this is actually very timely, but I found this on Blind the other day, literally 2 days ago. And for those who aren't familiar with Blind, Blind is kind of like a corporate Reddit mixed in with Glassdoor, mixed in with LinkedIn-ish, but it's basically a just completely anonymous way for people to just give their feedback and talk about relevant things happening in their companies or in their industries. And we talk so much about like this great resignation, and I am very, very guilty of this, calling and a lot of the media picks up on this as well. But I think that this idea of just people are tired just rings so true. It really humanizes what the problem is. And what this person is basically saying is that companies are just returning back to old processes that didn't even work to begin with. And they're not really identifying what the problems are or how to innovate and how to move forward in this new environment that we're in. So the major takeaway that I got here was that the companies who pivoted and continue to innovate are winning. And I think this speaks so true to what we had talked about last, Jeff, as well, in terms of just the market conditions and how much we're changing and evolving, and how we really can't stick to the same processes or the same kind of paradigms that we used to operate in.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, look, if things are adjusting as they do, I mean, the one thing that's consistent is change, right? So if we're not evolving with that change and we're not doing things to accommodate sort of the new demands in the marketplace, then we're going to find ourselves like, not being competitive. We're going to find ourselves in a situation where we're getting beat up by competition. I think the Great Resignation has a great ring to it, right? Like it sounds wonderful. So I think a lot of people are talking about it that way. But, I think that if you really were to deconstruct it and really look at how you can participate and how you can offset that Great Resignation, I think that you'll find that there are actually some pretty easy ways that you can kind of maneuver the landscape and really get yourself ahead of the game.
Yeah. And I think this also kind of aligns to those same three pillars that we had talked about in the last slide too, right? Where it's one, you have to reassess your processes and your practices, making sure that you're set up for success. Two, really coming back to the candidate experience and the employee experience as well. Talking about, focusing on retention and really being able to keep people happy throughout the entire process end to end. And then three, making them advocates for you. People are very vocal, especially in this age. So being able to provide that experience is not only, a necessity for your business, but it's also can be a really great tool for you to promote and grow your business.
Absolutely. I mean, look, at the end, like it's authenticity. If you're not authentic about what it is that you're delivering and what it is that you're trying to do for your candidates, it won't pass the sniff test. There's no more gamification of or gaming, sorry, not gamification, but there's no more gaming of the system anymore. Like at this point now, like your process needs to be sound, your technology has to stack in line with it, and you have to be authentic in what your messaging is. If any of those things are out of alignment, it doesn't matter what you're going to do. Like you won't be successful or you won't get the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this process. Jeff, you want to take this?
Oh my God, ridiculous. I mean, seriously, look at this thing. Look at it. And how many staffing agencies have been using this particular process? For how many decades has this process been being used, right? And I feel like it never gets shorter. It only gets longer. Like we just add one more dot to the mix and extend it out even further. Again, as you look at this, and I'm sure that everybody that's on here right now is looking at it and saying oh yeah, we have that process and we have that process and we've done better here and there. And it's great, right? But this is part of that journey mapping that we always talk about. And this is a great illustration from it. So I would say anybody who's on here listening to us now, feel free to do a screenshot of this and use this as your baseline that you can go back to and assess your own process at your organization. This process is the one, or these steps in this process are the ones that most of the agencies are using. But I also would recommend that there are opportunities for streamlining. There are also opportunities for improvement to bend it, to make it work better for the market conditions. And so, in digging into each one of these things, you'll find that you probably have old messaging that doesn't even belong there anymore. Or if you have implemented something like a Sense software, from 2 or 3 years ago, that perhaps the messaging that you're using at a given touch point may not be in alignment anymore. Just like a good business plan, your candidate journey and your client journeys, your process mapping is a living, breathing entity. And it's one that you should revisit on a pretty regular basis if you want to be able to rely on things like automation, AI, on all these additional things that Wendy, by the way, PS is going to be talking about a little later. Like if you want to dig into some of these other elements, this thing needs to be sound. Like it needs to be sound top to bottom, front to back, and everybody in your organization needs to understand what it is.
And just to answer the question that came through in the chat, yes, I forgot to mention that the recording will be shared after the webinar. So no need to feel like you have to screenshot every single one of these slides. We'll be sure to provide it afterwards.
Awesome.
All right. So let's jump into, I mean, we talked a little bit about how tooling can be a key part of this and how it's also part of this realization of what processes are working and what processes aren't. And I think one of the ways that we think about it here at Sense is also thinking about like, what are the pieces that are taking up and have the biggest opportunity for change. So let's jump into the first one of eliminating time-intensive processes. Jeff?
So with regards to this, right, like if you take a look at this pie chart, it really breaks out basically the fundamentals of what a recruiter is going to be doing and what their timeout is allocated toward. You're going to see things that are in here that could be probably run through an automation or through some sort of system or process, and some things that are going to absolutely require human interaction and engagement. You know, the idea in this whole thing is to lean into the things that require that human touch and relieve the recruiter of the things that don't require that human interaction and touch. And so if you can start to gradually remove some of those elements from the recruiter's plate, it means that they have a greater capacity, they have a greater availability to do those things that require that human touch. So to grow your business, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to add all of these recruiters or all these salespeople or what have you. It might just mean that you need to like retool how you're using your tech stack in order to allow your recruiters to do more of the things that you need physical, like human recruiters to do.
Definitely.
And so in eliminating those time-intensive processes, you could look at things like obviously implementing, cadence-based workflows, implementing AI chatbots to automate, screening processes, and even leveraging and integrating scheduling in order to reduce email fatigue. I mean, when you look at these 3 bullet points, these truly they encapsulate every portion of the process for the recruiter. And fatigue is a real thing. So as you look at the different messaging and the different touch points that you're doing, you want to be mindful of like just what that volume is and when those interactions are coming through. And you want to try to make sure that obviously those connections are as clean as possible. The more you have fragmentation or overlap, I call that friction in the funnel, right? So you have this funnel that you're bringing that candidate through. The more that you have like a glitch or an overlap or what have you, the more it raises a question for the candidate. And so what you want to do with automation and with all of these sequences is you want to be able to smooth that process out and not create those questions or concerns. You don't want it to create a cause for another email to have to come through to ask, was I supposed to get this email, or, did you need me to do this now, or whatever. You want those automations and pieces to really clear up a lot of the problems or a lot of the questions and help someone get through a process more smoothly.
I think like there's one thing in particular that you're just like sparking new ideas, and this is like completely not scripted, so you guys are live to hear this. But I think when it comes to, we talked a ton about candidate journey mapping and the importance of it, but I think something that is kind of like the next level from that is also looking at these micro journeys. And like Jeff, do you have any like suggestions on how to prioritize like the different journeys or the different activations or like the different, areas within the funnel that, people can help like from a prioritization perspective?
Sure. My recommendation is always the same. Start where the information is the most accurate, right? Because in automation, there is nobody that's going to sit there to look over it. Like the computer, AI isn't where we need it to be just yet to fix our problems, to fix all of the human errors, right? So start where your information is the most accurate. Personally, I love things like the start record. Generally speaking, start records are great because the recruiter has to start, the candidate needs to start, the hiring manager is expecting someone to be there, the recruiter and salesperson want to get paid, the company wants to get paid. So everybody is probably like 99 or 98% accurate at the start record, right? Maybe the date is wrong for the start date. We all know that that happens, but the details are probably accurate. So what I would do is I would start there with all of my automation. Any sequence would start with that start record and then build out going forward or backward. So, from the start record, you could do things like prepare them for their first day. So send a reminder, let them know, hey, by the way, you're starting on Monday. By the way, you need to bring these documents or these certifications, or you need to fulfill this onboarding documentation. I would do the same for the client to say, hey, don't forget, like this candidate is starting on Monday or on Friday, whatever the day is. And then gradually build yourself out. But from that start record, you could probably prop up, I would argue, a half a dozen, maybe more touch points between the preparation, the day of, the introduction. You could do the first day check-in, first week check-in, first month check-in. You could ask for reviews, referrals. Like you could really build out a lot from your start record and have it be successful. Mm-hmm. Give your company, give your staffing agency an opportunity to see this working successfully, and then continue to build out and do all those additional things that are much further down the funnel from the submittal and interview. Maybe you do additional preparation there, or even building out your alumni or advocacy groups.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is such a great way to think about it from like an automation perspective too. If you really kind of like think back to it, probably your really, really high performing recruiters are probably doing all those touch points without you having to do anything with them, right? It's just part of their innate recruiter senses where they're like, I want to check in on this person, make sure that they're happy. And so being able to, again, like thinking about how to eliminate these time intensive processes, being able to eliminate all of the back and forth or all of the things that they're already probably just copying and pasting to a certain degree, you can give back so much time to those recruiters and being able to help them reallocate those and that time. And so I know that, we talked a lot about this. I'm not going to go into into too much detail. There we go. But this is just an example of a workflow, right? Like, I think a lot of times when we talk about the practice or like the implementation of new technology, I think it sometimes can be a little bit too high level and not to the point where how does this actually look and how does this actually come to life? So we just want to give a quick visualization of like what it would look like to engage new applicants. And you can really have like this mixed media view because people are tired of emails. I always have to go through and delete 100 of them every day that I'm never gonna read anyways. And so being able to kind of think about yourself in that position as well, I think is really key to figure out, what are enjoyable experiences and which aren't. So thinking about different emails or different texts that you can send, and then being able to automate it based on like their application date, or even maybe it's like no activity. You can also automate that kind of outreach to make sure that you're really getting the most out of your candidates, right?
The one thing I also want to point out here is you have a lot of different moving parts, and you also have different teams that are impacted by this automation. So as simple as this looks, right, we're talking about 4 touch points. You have the candidate being emailed. You also have the candidate being texted, which means you're going to have to make sure that that mobile number is accurate. And then you also have a hiring manager getting touched, which is on the sales side. So as we go back to like the recap from last session, where we talked about basically like, doing your process, testing it all out, and then training. This is why it's super important to train everybody in the organization as to what it is that you're doing, especially when you're dealing with automation. Because in order to have a really comprehensive automation set, the whole purpose is to streamline your process and get people from point A to point B better. So in order to do that in a comprehensive manner, it's going to touch multiple people in a variety of departments. So building it all out, staging it properly, testing it, and then training everybody so that expectations are set means that your recruiters now know exactly what's going to go out when that trigger point happens, whether it be an application, a submittal, an interview, a review, whatever it is that you're setting as your trigger point. Same thing as sales. They'll then know, I don't need to reach out to let the hiring manager know that XYZ is happening because automation is going to deliver a message here on my behalf. And then, conversely, as you get into onboarding, the same thing sort of follows through.
Yeah. And then similar example with screening and scheduling, we talked a little bit about the introduction of AI and conversational AI within the recruiting space as well. And I think it's really important in a couple ways. The first being that there are just a baseline of things that you're always going to ask your same candidates, right? So for this example, you're asking for someone who's able to stand on their feet for 8 hours, that they have reliable transportation, that they consent to a background check. And these are things that, may take a recruiter an additional 5 minutes per candidate, but that adds up, right? So you can really think about leveraging these types of solutions and these types of technologies to still be effective within your process, but also just to save them a ton of time. And I think the great thing about the new technology that's coming out is that it is conversational, and that candidates and people are actually becoming more and more accustomed to this type of automation. They know that it's a bot. They're not fooled by it. And I think that's something that we, as companies and as agencies, kind of have to learn to embrace, that people aren't as afraid of technology as we think they are. And that just because you are using automation doesn't necessarily mean that you are taking away from the candidate experience. In fact, they might actually prefer to give all that information on their own time, like when they're at 5:30 a.m. or when they're, about to go to bed. Just being able to give them that option of doing things on their own end as well, I think is really just adding to that candidate experience.
Just had 2 points to this. One is, I think you're being generous by saying it's 5 minutes of recruiter time. I think that if a recruiter were to ask all these questions at the same time, yes, but if anybody forgot one of these, that's endless emails going back and forth. Second is, I always like to consider, when you look at automation, I always like to consider what people are doing physically at the moment which I'm engaging with them. And in this instance, you have people on your website that are applying for a job, they're filling out forms, and they're interacting with you digitally. So asking them to get this information through a bot or through a form fill or any other means, but in this case, we're talking about an AI chatbot, is ideal because you're meeting them in the medium that they're already participating. So better to do that collection while they're in the mode of giving you all the information that you want than to have it broken apart and be doing it during different parts of the process.
Yeah, definitely. So we actually kind of covered a lot of these best practices just through our conversation. But I think that the one that I love the most, maybe we can pick one each, Jeff, on these lists, but I love number 2, starting small. Again, I feel like AI and automation can feel so overwhelming that just being able to start with one simple journey or think of one single touch point, it really adds up over time. I heard the story of our customer, their recruiters were so hesitant because they were like, I don't want this automation to just email or text my candidates on my behalf. And yet they were able to get their Sunday nights back, the Sunday nights that they were spending texting all their candidates saying, hey, reminder, tomorrow's your first day. Just thinking about those small moments, it really adds up. And I feel like it also provides you the opportunity to do a little bit of a delight to your customers as well, or to your candidates. So I think that's kind of my favorite out of these 5.
I definitely like number 2. I'm gonna go in on number 5, reducing email fatigue. And here's the thing is, I think when a lot of people see this, they think email fatigue is volume, and that's not necessarily true. Email fatigue happens when your message is too similar. So if every single email that you send out through automation is, thank you, we'll get right back to you. Thank you, we'll get right back to you. Thank you, we'll get right back to you. Eventually they're like, we know you're gonna get back to us, right? So the idea is, in email fatigue, you do wanna consider volume, but to Wendy's point earlier, she's deleting 100 emails a day. We all do, right? If anybody has an empty email inbox, please message me. I wanna know how you do it. But with regards to email fatigue, volume will be very hard for you to create fatigue with, because you're only connecting with them when you absolutely need to on the trigger points that you've given. So unless you're emailing 5 times in a day, email fatigue would be pretty hard to hit from a volume perspective. But from a messaging and tone, email fatigue is very easy to accomplish. So make sure that you're looking at each one of these messages that you guys are sending out and that you're programming so that way it really does align with what's actually happening at that moment that they're receiving the email. And then make sure that your next message is different. Because if you start recycling messages too quickly, you're going to end up with that email fatigue that we're talking about.
Definitely. And for each of these sections, I am a huge math nerd. I went to Kumon for like 5 years. It was the greatest and worst times of my life. I still, thank you, Mom, for putting me through it. But I think that, quick math is just so important just to get a gut check on like how much this is adding value to my business. And, the TLDR of this page is that time savings across all automation tools. Time savings is really table stakes. Like, of course, you want to save time. That's the whole reason why you're doing automated touch points. But what does that actually turn into? Let's just say that you're able to save your candidate or your recruiters 1,000 hours across 100 candidates, right? Now what? Now you can reallocate that time towards making more placements or decreasing time to fill, getting more of that high touch, high personality and personalized experiences with your candidates so that they are getting through the funnel faster, which is really a dollar increase into your bottom lines, like new billable days. And you can also reallocate that time towards increasing your NPS, which leads to an increase in retention. And it also decreases your cost of candidate acquisition too, right? Like if you're able to get more people to be your advocates and your company's, ambassadors, then you're really able to capitalize on that and get new candidates in the funnel, or increase your employer branding as well.
I think a lot of times, like companies before they go to put in place, any sort of marketing automation or what have you, like they're always looking for like, well, what's going to be the ROI? Like, what's the ROI of me doing this? And many times they'll think only of that end result, which is revenue. And unfortunately, like that's real, but you also have to consider like, I don't know if it's soft ROI, like internal ROI, like whatever you're saving right on the inside is still ROI. And so, this really does start to exponentially show its value as you start to implement different tools like this.
I'm going to call them the intangible ROIs.
I like it. Not soft ROI. I was like, soft skills? I don't know what I'm. Go ahead.
It made sense. And then I just put together, we, have this quick take home worksheet because again, quick math, and it just helps you put, a structure to getting a quick gauge of like how this kind of impacts your business. So we have these for each of the sections. Feel free to screenshot this, but again, we'll send out the recording. And this should just show you a gauge of how this can impact your business by introducing these technologies and also processes that will help you eliminate a lot of the friction. All right, next one. Jeff, will you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we did talk about previously, we talked about having a high touch motivational automation, right? So using automation in order to sort of create that space where maybe an individual might feel uncomfortable doing more touch points or may not have the availability to do more touch points and more handholding, but where you can use automation as a strategy to increase those touch points, creating a high touch, high motivation environment as they interact with your staffing agency. So I really do love this concept.
Go for it.
So with regards to onboarding, right? This is a great opportunity to really present more of this high touch automation, because if you think about it, like the last thing you want to do is get someone to a finish line and then not have them cross, right? Like that's just like the ultimate failure. And so in this instance, as we said, the start records are generally like 97%. I keep going down a little bit. So like they're mostly accurate. But with that said, if you use automation in order to be able to motivate these individuals to really get across the finish lines, ensure that all of their information is submitted on time so that they could start on time, then the revenue starts sooner, right? So like all of these things really pitch back to looking at your staffing agency and making sure that your hiring cycle is as short as it could possibly be. You've limited and decreased as much of the time spent with the back and forth with the candidate. And also that you've shown to your clients that you guys can expedite, your team can expedite things in a very real, tangible way. So going through this, enabling some sort of like personalization and scaling through automation really does equip your recruiters with the capabilities to do sort of like two-way texting, automating critical experience feedback loops, and also enabling your system of record to show complete candidate engagement history Like really what we're talking about doing here is on each of these engagements, providing multiple ways to do different touch points, providing opportunities for the candidates to both interact, supply information, and also give feedback, and being able to record every bit of that transaction or those transactions on the candidate record in order for you to then be able to use it for reporting, and be able to identify areas of opportunity in order to increase efficiency and improve your processes.
Yeah, and I think that the process, and again, the whole idea of training your entire team, I think that third point of being able to really have a complete candidate engagement history is so core as well, because your recruiters may not have the same level of visibility as your people in, the back office or whatever it might be. So being able to have like a source of truth and being able to see like all of the engagement is really critical for alignment across your business, but also it's also from a candidate experience perspective. How many times have we been in those experiences where you've submitted your preferences like 18 million times and the next person who comes up to you is still asking you the same question? It's infuriating. It's like,
sure,
13 people from your same company have asked me the same question. Like, don't you have some type of record? Like, this is so critical for that experience as well, because again, going back to email fatigue, message fatigue, it comes down to like, making sure that you're providing experiences and really being able to scale your team in both ways, right? Through technology, but also through personalization.
Agreed.
And again, going back to kind of like a tangible way of visualizing this, I mentioned a similar example of one of our clients who sends us those automated texts, but you can really do these types of two-way texting where it goes from automated to one-on-one back seamlessly from a candidate perspective, but also visually like differentiated for your team. So you can send out these broadcasts, whether they're for job alerts or whether they're for job fairs of, hey, like, we have a job fair, a career fair tomorrow at 1 p.m. at this place. And that can be automated and sent out to thousands of candidates. And you can still, target that to your demographic or to your industry that you're looking for. And again, giving your recruiters that time back and just being able to source more candidates for a similar role. But at the same time, you can also do, like more one-on-one conversations. So for example, even though the candidate is seeing all these different messages, they can still text back and say, hey, can you resend the office address? And then your recruiters can actually follow up with individual texting and just say, hey, here's the address. This is a North Pole reference for those who don't know. Just do that. It is December. I feel like it's appropriate.
Solid.
So let's talk about best practices for two-way texting. Again, I'm going to put my favorite on this, which is number 4, actually, tracking recruiter adoption and campaign level performance analytics. I think especially when it comes to texting, if you're doing it on your own mobile phone, it becomes a haywire of things that you have to track, right? Like you can't, you really can't understand like how much volume your recruiters are sending, what campaigns they're sending it to. So really being able to have a dashboard or some kind of analytics to show who's texting, who's not texting, and being able to have that level of visibility is something that I think is really unique and something that's cool when it comes to evaluating your impact in your business practices.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's number 3. Making sure that you're using messaging or texting as a way to get some feedback, right? So a lot of times, like even for myself, like things will get lost in my personal email box, right? So like there'll be times where I might not see something, but if you want to be able to get like really important feedback, like especially first day, right? How did things go on your first day? Is there anything I need to jump in on? Like getting that information early is the ability to nip it in the bud before it becomes a problem. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe the hiring manager didn't even know that there was an issue. So being able to jump on things like that quickly is important. So providing that in a text versus an email that can get buried or be in someone's personal email box, I think is a great way to leverage the technology.
You actually gave me like the perfect transition to the next slide, which I didn't even realize.
It's like
It's like we've done this before. But I think one thing that's really important to understand is, text has such a high rate of response compared to email. With email, you have your open rate, your click-through rate, like you have all these, metrics that can help you. But again, you're kind of servicing a lot of different friction in a lot of areas where they can just not respond to you. And I feel like that's one of the biggest opportunities and the biggest advantages of having texting is that it does feel very personal, and it is used correctly, it can really garner a really strong response rate. So for those critical feedback loops, it's awesome to have a tool like two-way text messaging so that you can reduce your no-shows and reduce the problems that can happen from point A to point Z, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And going into the math, the cost of no-shows. So we took these industry agnostic numbers in terms of the cost per hire, but let's just say that you had a person and you gave them an offer. It was a all-in, fully loaded talent acquisition cost was $2,500. And then they don't show up. Gut wrenching, right? But not only did you lose out on that $2,500, now you're having to activate the next best candidate, which is, was another $1,500 that you had spent in order to acquire them or to activate them. So there's another $1,500 that you're spending, making your total kind of cost of acquisition for this one role $4,000. It's a pretty penny. And when you look at that across like 10,000 placements, you can see the difference between the no-show rate, where you talk about the total number of placements, times it by the no-show rate, times it by your acquisition cost, and you can see how much you're losing just by not having a no-show. But through like sentiment analysis and through doing more analyses on your candidates and like their interaction, their engagement, collecting their pulse in terms of how happy they are, you can reduce this number pretty significantly before it even gets to that point where you're, having a 20% no-show rate.
I'd also say there's also there's one other element to consider that couldn't necessarily be set up in an equation. And that is, how many no-shows does it take before a client tells you to go away? So while we're talking about a cost per no-show, I would argue it won't take many no-shows for you to lose the client entirely. And that is even more costly, like overall, right? Those numbers start growing exponentially. So, be aware that like, even though these equations are sort of put in place in order to give you some anecdotal evidence as to like how or why it might be important during your leadership conversations this time of year to be negotiating or discussing things like automation and how you can sort of put these things in place for your onboarding. It's anecdotal. If you take the real life example and look at like what the cost of no-shows can be to a client relationship, it could be really detrimental and could be costing you millions in just one client.
Yeah, definitely.
Chris was asking, I just don't want to interrupt too much, but Chris was just asking, he said, I must have missed something, but my organization does most of these things, but we're using multiple technologies to accomplish this. Does Sense give the ability to automate the following sequence in multiple prong approach, like this sequence of texting, phone, email, et cetera, all from one spot? Wendy?
Chris, do you work for a company? The answer is yes. We didn't want to make this too much of a sales pitch type of webinar, but Sense is, one of our biggest benefits is that we are all in one, and that we do think about this from a candidate experience of integrating all these different types of technologies and ways to engage your candidate all in one platform. So that includes automated workflows from an email perspective that also lead into SMS. We have two-way text messaging. We also offer chatbots, both inbound as well as outbound. So on your website, as well as kind of data enrichment chatbots that you can send across all your candidates via email or text. And you can do that all in one place. So yes. Short answer.
I would also say, Chris, great opportunity if you are looking to consolidate. It's a great opportunity to actually, again, reassess your process, make sure that your messaging is sound, and do the migration. You can actually phase it, right? So in migrating from multiple tools into one tool, like one solution, an all-in-one solution, you can migrate those things over little by little, giving you the opportunity to adjust or amend your process, improve your messaging, train your team. Bring over the next one, amend your process, adjust your messaging, train your team, and really come out with a really comprehensive solution.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the math worksheets that I didn't put on here is really the ability for you to have like multiple point solutions versus one solution, right? And just being able to work in one and have one dedicated source of truth. And I think that was something that we had talked about earlier, but really having one cohesive system of record and system of engagement is really key to make sure that everybody's aligned across the board, right? Going back to like having those interaction and the engagement kind of opportunities and having all of that documented somewhere is really beneficial from end to end across your entire business. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. And then, your take home worksheet. Again, I think something that you had mentioned is also the, I forget if I put it in here, the lost billing. So not only are you at risk for losing your client, which is a huge risk, but you're also losing billing for that no-show. Like it takes you, best case scenario, you can have that person replaced within the day, within whatever. But if you're losing days and having to restart that entire process, that's also kind of added into your cost of the no-show. All right, coming up on our third and final one. This is probably my favorite, but we talk about retention. Jeff, you want to talk it through?
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to retention, you're investing heavily in nurturing your candidates, and you're doing your best to try to make sure that you create the best experience possible for them to be able to stay engaged. But as you're competing with all the other staffing agencies in the marketplace, what are you doing in order to provide a consistent and remarkable experience for these candidates to engage with you? And what is it that you're providing to them in order to kind of keep them wanting to come back? So as we look at sort of like the entire process, and as you've gotten through the placement, you got through onboarding, you got them situated, what is it that you're doing in order to be able to retain them in your database, in your pipeline, for when their contract expires, if they're going to be available for redeployment? And if they love you so much, what is it that you're doing in order to be able to support them to becoming an advocate for you? So yeah, we're talking right now about that retain and redeploy. So driving in more placements and redeployments is critically important as you're starting to look at your 2022 projections and what it is that you're going to do. Again, because as we talked about, like the Great Resignation and all these other things that are happening, we also have, like, I hate to say it, but like yet another variant on the horizon. So, there is, I think, as much as we have gotten through much of the pandemic, I think there's also still a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace as you go forward into 2022. So it's going to be really important that all of you take the time in order to make sure that you're optimizing what it is that you have available to you in your pipelines and with your clients, so that way you can work smarter instead of harder, right? And so keeping that talent engaged through your workflows and making sure that there's a good cadence that sort of motivates them with a very high touch will be very important. Using AI in order to be able to match candidates with new job opportunities, again, being a little bit more expeditious and a little bit more proactive in that alignment will mean that your clients will see that you've got you have their needs in mind, and that you're actually facilitating activities to help them progress their careers faster. And then lastly, scale your referrals through a seamless platform solution. So, in order to maintain a good experience, it's all about making sure that like your systems are integrated natively, and that the activities are recorded right to that candidate record. If you don't have a native integration, if you're dealing with a custom integration, that's could be a little bit tricky. But if the details aren't getting recorded back to the main ATS where all of your people are living, then it really creates a lot of complications and challenges in trying to keep consistency. So, put yourself in the shoes of that candidate. Someone who has worked with you, they had a great experience. They then send you one of their most trusted friends to say, hey, listen, like you should go through XYZ staffing. I feel like there should be a staffing company called XYZ Staffing. I feel like it's a missed opportunity for me, but then there's no follow-up. Like that inconsistency is not going to win you more candidates. It's certainly not going to use your technology in order to improve the circumstance.
Great. Sorry, I don't know if it was my internet or yours, but it was a little bit choppy, but we got there.
Oh.
And I think this kind of brings things back full circle. And I know that we talked about, rebranding the Great Resignation into more of like the career revitalization, or just, companies getting it better and getting it right and innovating. But I think one of the things that we talk about is the fact that like candidates are on a forward journey. They don't really stay in the same, or they don't want to necessarily stay in the same job and the same title and the same kind of responsibilities. And I think that this was one of the pieces of the great realization as well, of reevaluating what's important to them or what they want to do. Maybe they, were a nurse and got burnt out and maybe want to try something else. And I think part of that, from a technology standpoint, is really understanding and really being able to provide these like preference-based matching that is more impactful and actually takes preferences into consideration. So it's not just, scaling one-to-one, hey, here's, you were a sales associate here, here's the next sales associate role, but thinking through, hey, do you want a different title or do you want different responsibilities? And really being able to provide that to a candidate is such an amazing experience for them to feel like they're being taken care of. So this is just an example of how that can look. And you can, again, this is automated. You can actually have job matching as a field. That's actually something that's new, that Sense is rolling out. But you can actually integrate that into these automated workflows so that, imagine a candidate is coming up on their end date. You can automatically send them a notification saying, hey, we noticed that you're coming up on your end date of your assignment. What's next? And either collect their preferences or set up time with them to talk through what's next for their career, or update their profile, and just really being able to provide these moments where the candidates can give you their feedback and give you their notes and their thoughts too.
Once again, this is an automation that is sent on behalf of one of your employees. It's being sent on behalf of your recruiter. So again, when we go back to that like time allocation slide, when you think about all the things that your recruiters are doing, by inserting this one element means that it's not just the email send that takes time, but it's also watching your pipeline. It's also making sure that that you've done your research, that you dig into the candidate profile, that you provide them the information necessary. If you can have a solution that actually does that for the recruiter, then it frees them up for when that reply comes back, because that reply is going to have to be handled manually by a recruiter, by a human being. So doing this not only provides a better experience for your candidates, but it also props up that opportunity to the recruiter so that they are available when the time comes that they have to do a response.
Awesome. Couldn't agree more. And let's see, best practices for retention and redeployment. And I'm going to throw in their referrals as well. And I'll actually touch on that as like my point. I've been in various situations throughout, like referring friends, referring colleagues, and not knowing a single thing of what's happening. And not knowing, did they get hired? Did they get interviewed? When am I going to get paid? Most importantly. And I think just being able to have, from a company standpoint, being able to automate that and make sure that all those gaps are filled so that your experience that you're capitalizing on this happy candidate does not go to the trash, for lack of a better word, right? Like you're really like, you are in this precious moment where your candidate or your employees are so happy with you that they want to refer another candidate to work for you. And to do that and track all that in unruly Excel sheets, I know there are some guilty parties out there.
There are spreadsheets.
I love spreadsheets too, but there's a time and a place. And tracking payments on spreadsheets to people is definitely one that says high risk and would not want to promote whatsoever. But I think it's a great way for you so being able to automate that and being able to give notifications to the recruiter, to the candidate, to the person who referred that candidate, and just being able to have that level of transparency is another way that you can continue to grow that trust in that candidate experience from your company.
I think that like a lot of times, like I would lean into like that consistent, relevant, timely outreach, like that marketing automation thing. But this time around, I'm going to change it up a little bit. The candidate profiles I feel are a very underrated asset that staffing firms have that they don't do enough with. And so if you were able to create automation that allowed your candidate to update their candidate profile and keep it consistent and current, and you became their trusted resource as their career advancement professional, right? If that was a strategy, you no longer are, you've elevated your role of recruiter to something greater than recruiter. And I think that like, as you look for ways to sort of carve out who you're going to be in 2022 and how you're going to differentiate in the marketplace, something as simple as a focus on a candidate profile and building automation to maintain the accuracy and relevance of that as a component to your agenda for the year could be amazingly differentiating in the marketplace, right? Like other staffing agencies are likely not doing this. And so if you have that component and you tie in automation in order to be able to use it, and then that's the other thing, right? Is that not only do you get them to perform the actions, but then you have to use it if you're going to ask them for it. Like there'd be nothing worse than you like hooking me to say, hey, come on in, fill out your profile. We're going to give you some really cool stuff. And then I do all of that. And then you give me nothing, right? Like that's not fun. That's not fun for me. But to incorporate this into your action plan and how it is that you're going to use your database more effectively, and also be able to pull from the resources that you already have instead of always going back out to the pool to find another candidate, like that to me is just, that's next level. Like that's where you just change the game and you've differentiated yourself in the marketplace along with your process.
And you can actually leverage automation to do, like automation is a huge part of how to do that in a scalable way. Like realistically, your recruiters probably don't want to spend hours in a week asking, hey, are you interested in looking for a new career or a new position? That's again, going back to time intensive processes, that is definitely time intensive and does not, it has a very low likelihood of success. But if you're able to just do that through one survey and then just automatically get a refreshed list of people who are looking for new opportunities, like that is so actionable. And that is so instantly gratifying for your company to be able to have like this very tangible thing that they can leverage for future communications.
Automation and workflows, automation and workflows.
Awesome. I'm going to skip through these slides because it's mostly, again, the math. But this was just a take-home worksheet on what it would look like if you were able to increase your placements per year just by having better referrals and better reactivation, which the candidates in those types of segments tend to get hired a lot faster because you've already vetted them. So there's a quick take-home worksheet for you. And let's go through the recap. And we don't have to do this recap verbatim, but I think, Jeff, if you actually want to take us through like this slide again, whereas like talking about the processes, I think we can end on this note.
Yeah, for sure. So in the beginning, we talked about, obviously there was like 25, 26 steps in the process, something crazy. And some of you have more, we know, Santa told us. Yeah, well, so with that end, like these are some great ways that you can actually amend your process, right? By using automation in order to be able to really free up your talent, that internal talent. So whether you've been impacted by the pandemic and have had to reduce the size of your teams in order to be able to, for self-preservation to make sure that you're around tomorrow, or you just simply have like, I don't know, maybe you're recruiting strictly for Zoom and healthcare. And so you're super busy, but either way, whatever it is, these are some great ways where you can sort of amend your process, use automation to take some of the human effort out of it, allow technology to really be inserted in order to provide that high touch at the right time, updating candidate records, smoothing out your processes, reducing friction, and actually consolidating and perhaps even, I would say, expediting your hiring cycle.
Yeah. And I think what's mind blowing about this is that this is not necessarily a linear process either. Like it would be great if this was linear. The truth is that you probably have a lot of cycles and mini journeys within each of these stages. So you can really see how the automation really helps in terms of just becoming like a shortcut, right? Like the chutes and ladders kind of type of game where you can really advance how quickly and how efficiently your company is able to process and reallocate that effort towards building a better candidate experience, and not only candidate experience, but also recruiter and client experience.
Agreed. Automation isn't just for candidates. It is a candidate-centric market still, and we still need to prioritize them. But if you're putting in automation, you might as well use it for your clients too.
Might as well. So again, a little bit of an, but going back to 2022 goals, love setting goals. Goals are my favorite. But when you think about your goals, I think it's important to evaluate them, take stock, understand where you are today, understand where you want to be, and really unpack the supporting initiatives. Like, how are you going to tangibly get to those goals? What are the initiatives that you have to do? What's the, the investment that you need to make, or where are your greatest pitfalls? And I think, step 2 is really aligning your tech stack or even your partnerships or your ecosystem to optimize and fill those gaps. Whether it's candidate experience, or whether it's your messaging, whether it's your, your channels, whatever they might be, being able to kind of fill in the gaps and really being able to figure out what's working well, what's not working well, I think is really critical to be able to figure out what your next steps are for 2022. And then the last, again, because I'm a math nerd, assigning the appropriate metrics and doing the math, whether they are tangible or intangible. I think you being able to put numbers or putting in some type of metric of how you're going to define success is really critical for you to understand what's worth going after and what's not.
I would also add to this, if I could just add one caveat, the fundamentals are key to getting all these things right. So, if you've already gone down the path of assessing your process and making sure that you've got all of your components in place, you're good to go to hit step 1. If you haven't revisited your process over the last 12 months because you've been just running from end to end trying to make things work, I get it. But before I would add anything additionally to any mix or start ripping things out and revamping, start with those fundamentals, get your foundation in place before you start building your structure.
Definitely. We are up on time, but I think we started a couple minutes late, so I'm just going to give a couple more minutes for people to leave any outstanding questions in the chat or in the Q&A function. But I also did put in both Jeff, I hope you don't mind that I spammed out your email.
Yeah, of course.
But I put Jeff and my emails on there. If you guys want to, if any of you want to reach out with any future questions that you might have, please feel free, and we're happy to answer them. And Keith, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your message. Jeff, any last words?
No, listen, I think that I think that right now, this time of year is a great time of year for getting all your things in order and knowing what it is that you need to do strategically going forward. A lot of people have probably already assessed what their budgets are. But I would argue that, the year isn't closed out yet. And so in trying to understand what it is that you need, make sure that the things that you intend on doing are in fact aligned with the market conditions, as well as the scope of business that you have and your potential. So, be thoughtful, be mindful, and look at the details, right? I think that so many times we end the end of the year and we think of things from a either hypothetical or big picture view. And I think these things are great in order to get the conversation going. But when it comes to implementation, the details are crucially important. So those would be my little nuggets of wisdom for the wrap up.
And also just reward yourself and take stock of all your accomplishments. It's been a tough couple of years to just think about, where you've been and where you're going. So take a moment to pat yourself on the back, and also recognize your team for all the challenges that they have had to overcome as well. So I think, yes, we will again slow out the slides in the webinar after this. And thank you everybody for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Wendy. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for being on here. Always a great time with you, Jeff.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.